Hi, I'm Lee Webster. This is a recording made of the original presentation to New Hampshire Healthy Climate on May 13th of 2025. I've included additional resources and information for further research at the end of the video. Most of us are unaware of the social and environmental costs of the current American funeral. Tonight, I'm going to drill first down into what those issues are and then try to offer ways we can make more informed, healthy choices. If it sounds a lot like something other than green burial at first, then hang in there because I've saved the best for last. Let's start with what happens when someone dies. Dollars to donuts, somebody calls a funeral home within a half hour. And not just a funeral home, but the funeral home, the one the family has used as long as anybody can remember. No price checking, no online searches, no comparison shopping. The current price range for a full funeral is somewhere in the $8,000 to $18,000 range, one of the most expensive purchases of our lifetimes. Here's the picture in more detail. Even direct cremations are out of range for many at $2,500 here in New Hampshire. By contrast, New Hampshire green burial cemetery plots average about $360. And add this to the mix. The U.S. Federal Reserve reported last year that 63% of all American households did not have the cash reserves to pay for an unexpected expense in excess of $400. Most people are unaware that they have a choice about whether to be a consumer at all. As an American citizen, you and I have the constitutional right under family privacy law to care for our own dead. In most states, including New Hampshire, we can choose what we need or want to pay for help with, but first we need to understand that we can do everything ourselves at little to no cost. Here are two solutions to addressing funeral poverty, starting with reacquainting people with how to conduct body care in the home, how to file paperwork with town clerks, and what legal requirements there are. Many people find navigating the legalities and the logistics easier than they'd expected, depending on the circumstances. Here's another one. Faith communities, civic organizations, senior centers, even neighborhoods are forming community care groups that support families who choose to take back control. This is especially important for people who outlive their peers or family members, or people who've relocated or been uprooted, or people who just don't have stable social networks. The support provided by individuals and community care groups can save money, provide comfort, and help ensure that last wishes are followed. And one quick note here about doulas, who've been getting a lot of press. End-of-life doulas are trained specifically in paid, non-medical, before-death support. But everything changes at the moment of death. Home funeral guides and after-death educators volunteer expertise in that after-death support of families. And some doulas are home funeral guides, but some don't know the difference, and some don't know how to get both hats on during the whole period. The thing to really understand is that no one takes the place of a licensed funeral director, but the next of kin. So we need to talk about a couple of things that we've come to take for granted. The first one is embalming. Contrary to most people's belief, embalming is not legally required as a matter of course. It has nothing to do with public health and safety. It's a cosmetic procedure with short-term preservation, often required by funeral homes to get through a public service in their place of business. And it supports the funeral industry's memory picture concept. And that's the idea that the last view is the most important. New Hampshire law was recently changed to compel families to either embalm, seal in an airtight case, or refrigerate after 48 hours in a funeral director's care. This doesn't apply to families who care for their own dead. One compromise around this, if it feels like too much, is to keep a loved one home for longer while having the funeral director file the death certificate and obtain the burial transit permit. We call these blended funerals. So why do we care about embalming? Here's why. The formaldehyde in 4 million plus gallons of embalming fluid that goes into our lawn cemeteries every year becomes gaseous and dissipates within a couple of weeks. But other ingredients, such as benzene, methanol, ethanol, sodium nitrate, these all have an impact on the soil microbiome that we all depend on to sustain life on Earth. And embalming has a human toll too. Embalmers have an 8 times higher risk of contracting myeloid leukemia and a 3 times higher risk of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, neurological diseases, particularly Parkinson's. All of this adds up to a 13% higher early death rate for embalmers than the general public. And while we're talking about workers, let's consider what lawn cemetery and crematory operators and employees are exposed to. Herbicides, pesticides, and caustic cleaning agents are breathed in by groundskeepers, causing cancers, respiratory diseases, and neurological disorders. Roundup, used in mass quantities in lawn cemeteries, is known to be responsible for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at alarming rates. Crematory operators are also at risk of radiopharmaceutical contamination and resulting cancers due to exposure, particularly when cremating radiation-treated breast and prostate cancer patients. Is it these death workers' choice to engage in all these dangerous practices? Well, they'll tell you that they do it because it's demanded by the public. So the easy solution to that is that we demand more clean, simple, and non-harmful death practices. Here's another thing to be clued into. What we know from cemetery studies all around the world is that it's what's buried in the ground with the body that pollutes, causing what's called cemetery plume. It's not the bodies themselves. Mass manufactured caskets leach various materials from glues to hardware to finishes, and they're made from stuff that will never biodegrade. And by the way, this is what the industry calls the furniture. Caskets made from exotic woods are largely harvested from rainforests in South America. Then they get transported and shipped up the coast, then transported again to the American breadbasket when they're manufactured in industrial facilities. Then they get shipped out to distributors and finally get to sales rooms. Metal caskets have followed a similar pattern, using thousands of tons of mostly Chinese and Canadian steel, bronze, and copper. Disruptive innovators are doing some extraordinary work in the funeral world, but beware of what I call the entrepreneurs. They'll try to sell you biodegradable caskets from halfway across the world, possibly made by tiny hands and maybe not made under fair labor laws. They'll try to sell you burial pods made of what they call biodegradable plastic that promises to make you a tree. These are cremation urns. They're really not full body burial. It's just an artist's rendition. They'll try to sell you on scattering or burying cremated remains on land that's not a licensed cemetery, nor is it being managed by a bona fide land trust. And incidentally, scattering of cremated remains is free with landowner permission anywhere. But check the price tag. That should be your first scam clue. They've already tried and failed to sell you mushroom inoculated burial suits that didn't work even for a second, and they're no longer in production. The only academic research project that started to check this out was closed halfway through because there was no evidence that it worked. But instead, we can shift our focus to support local artists and craftspeople who often source materials locally. More people are choosing products that are made from organic or more readily accessible materials like softwoods, mainly pine right here in New Hampshire, certainly for caskets. Long ago methods of weaving caskets from willow, a fast-growing renewable resource, are being revived along with using hemp, seagrass, other found or organic materials. And more people are opting for cotton, wool, hemp, and linen shrouds than at any time since the Civil War. And yes, you can make your own even if you hire a funeral home. Cremation is a whole other subject that we need to talk about before we can talk about green burial, so that you understand the differences. You've no doubt heard about alkaline hydrolysis, also called green cremation, biocremation, aquamation, resumation. It's all alkaline hydrolysis. You've probably all heard about human composting or natural organic reduction by now. But did you know that these are all legally cremation processes? Both alkaline hydrolysis and human composting are written into law under the statutes for flame cremation because they're incomplete, above ground processes usually performed in an industrial facility. They all take care of the soft tissue in one way or another, but they leave the bones and the other durables. That's the hair, teeth, nails, and bones. Those need to be processed and disposed of, or with human composting, added back into the leftover mulch. There's also the significant cost of using natural resources to support urban composting systems. And there's the footprint of shipping a body across the country to a multi-million-dollar industrial facility, or maybe, as you see on the right, the hand-cranked plywood cradle outdoors, usually under a wedding tent. Since neither option is legal yet in New Hampshire, we have time to think about how this might work, but here's something else to note. There's a correlation between the amount of time each process takes and how much it costs. All cremation processes burn fossil fuels, and what we burn, we breathe. Some emit mercury and particulates into the atmosphere and into our waterways. All three processes result in crushed bone that's between 2,000 and 200 times too alkaline to support plant life. When scattered or buried around a tree, it can cause girdling and death of the tree. When scattered above ground in quantity, it can cause phosphorus runoff that creates algae bloom and kills marine life and vegetation. Composting a person results in about a cubic yard or more, or which is about 3/4 of a ton of leftover unfinished mulch, as you can clearly see. This is not soil. It has to be trucked out of the city where most of these plants are located to be spread on the surface of fields and meadows. Alkaline hydrolysis requires the disposal of about 10 to 15 pounds of bone, but also about up to 300 gallons of effluent. And the agencies tasked with safe handling of soil, mulch, and industrial effluent, such as the USDA and the EPA, have yet to come up with protocols for safe disposal of human compost or alkaline hydrolysis leftovers. So when you hear that alkaline hydrolysis and human composting are green, what it really means is it's greener than flame cremation, but it's certainly not green burial. It also means greener than lawn cemetery burial with concrete vaults that crack and leak and take centuries to begin to break down. Concrete vaults keep the lawn flat for mowing, but they originally came into use during the 1930s to keep grave robbers from getting in, though they hadn't been doing that for decades. But they also, and this is really interesting, it's actually in the patents for these burial vaults. The other purpose was to keep the zombies out, which was a big rage during the 1930s, the same time these vaults went into being. That's for real. So here's another way of looking at it. Those vaults are made of concrete that emit more than 1,800 pounds of carbon per unit during manufacture. That alone. But by comparison, flame cremation units emit 250 to 535 pounds per person, and alkaline hydrolysis approximately 150 pounds. So composting emissions are going to vary according to methods, as you saw, and also what types of bulking agents they're using. So there are too many variations and too many factors, but we do know there are significant emissions. So what does this mean for New Hampshire? Here's a quick snapshot that takes the actual pounds of carbon emissions in 2022 due to cremation, translates those into base figures that could have been carbon sequestration if everyone had been buried naturally instead. So instead of emitting over 1 million pounds of carbon, we could have sequestered more than 136,000 pounds. And it may not seem like a lot to you, but if you look at it year after year after year, the thing to know is that the only disposition method that actually sequesters carbon and nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus is natural burial. So that's where we are next. This is what green burial is. And we call it green burial and natural burial sort of interchangeably. You'll see why it makes a difference in a moment. But natural burial is full body burial directly in the ground with no impediments to natural decomposition. Only 2 states require a burial depth in excess of 4 feet, and that's 5 feet in those 2 states. So 4 feet gives us a very comfortable 18 to 24-inch smell barrier. Sorry there. Biomass is placed below and above the body before returning to soil by strata to restore its natural order. We lay in the roots that were broken to act as a conduit for mycorrhizal reintegration. We even put stones back in to support ant populations that are essential for improving soil structure and drainage and aiding in nutrient cycling. But for the most part, it's this simple. It's just body to earth and let Mother Nature take her course. So we need to talk about the no's. These are what I call the no's. These are the questions I often get that are based on fears that we've developed over many decades of being separated from the death process. But here are the answers. That 18 to 24-inch smell barrier is what protects the grave from any kind of animal disturbance. They can't smell anything that deep, and they don't want to bother with that much work, even if they could. They just don't care. Water does not get contaminated from graves, not natural burial graves for sure. And here's why. The thing that breaks down in the body that could be a problem in quantity is nitrate. So any nitrates are going to be the nitrate load is going to be determined by modeling prior to the cemetery being built. But here's what we know. This is really the takeaway. A family of 4 flushes 100 times more nitrates in one day than a decomposing body emits during its entire burial. So it's really not a problem. And most pathogens die with the host. Others, like hepatitis B and C, have relatively short shelf lives of a couple of days up to a week. Hemorrhagic fever pathogens, like Ebola and Creutzfeldt-Jakob prions, are known to lay dormant in soil, but they're bound and mitigated over time. Burial is the safest disposition method known for pathogens. And chemo drugs, hear a lot about that. They've usually been off-boarded by the time that the burial occurs, but even if they're present, research at forensic body farms has revealed that soil does a great job in binding and mitigating pharmaceuticals. So that one of the other questions is, what about metals? Metals from implants, knee replacements. What about fillings? Well, we're not really concerned because we've already eliminated a 2-ton concrete vault that would have included all those things anyway. And if we're not cremating, we're not putting mercury up into the stacks to fall into our lakes and streams. So I mentioned the different types of cemeteries, the difference between green cemeteries and natural cemeteries. Green kind of covers the whole gamut of the subsets of cemeteries. The first one to talk about is hybrids. This is, most of us are familiar with these because we have a local cemetery system here in the state of New Hampshire. These are called hybrids because they continue to bury with vaults, but they also include green options. In New Hampshire, it's the main model. And the reason for that is it's required by law that every town provide burial space for its own citizens. And every year we elect trustees who can change the cemetery rules, including that vault requirement. People choose hybrids, by the way, because they want to be buried in a place that loved ones associate them with. We humans crave a sense of place. So as an aside, and this is not part of the green burial picture, other than the fact that we usually bury green on our own property, the reason, more people are creating private family cemeteries on their own land is because of that sense of place. These are for family members only. You don't get to invite your best friend over for eternity. So the burial gets recorded with the town trustees, and the deed gets amended upon transfer along with a map of where people can walk to visit in the future. There are various setbacks required by New Hampshire law, such as 50 feet distance from state highways and known water sources, usually means the well, about 100 feet from buildings. And there's a rare zoning ordinance in one town that I know of in the entire state. Other than the burial permit, no other permissions or notifications are required. You don't have to go to the town hall and ask for permission. It's your right. Back to public green burial cemeteries. This is the next level, and this is called a natural burial ground. All right, so you can see where the confusion lies by calling it natural burial, but natural burial grounds are a level that the Green Burial Council certifies, one of the three: the hybrid, the natural, and the conservation. But natural burial grounds are usually independently operated burial grounds that welcome anyone. Municipal cemeteries tend to only allow people from their own town. So these are open to anyone. Some of them are religious in nature. But these cemeteries follow all the green burial rules: the no vaults, no embalming, only biodegradable containers, and that 3.5 to 4 feet. Natural burial does not pollute air or soil or water. In fact, natural burial of our organic bodies supercharges soil with usable nutrients, improving soil health. So the last of the three levels of green burial is the conservation burial. And this is a natural burial cemetery that happens on land that's saved and stewarded and protected for future generations. All these levels of green cemeteries are designed to stop introducing toxins into the ground, but only conservation burial grounds partner with land trusts to truly protect the land. We do that by placing an easement or other permanent instrument on it. We move our cemeteries all the time. People tend to forget that. So having an easement truly protects the land. So in order to understand this better, I think it helps to flip our thinking. Instead of seeing cemeteries as commodities, we need to see burial as the strategy for saving intrinsically valuable land that can be used for funerals and burials, but also for educational programs for all ages, for walking and other recreational opportunities. I see a lot of elementary school nature hikes happening. And the top activity in green cemeteries, when we did a survey at the GBC, was bird watching. We do agricultural projects, including land restoration, plus commercial sales of native species plants right on the property. These take the place of imported hothouse flowers. And they also assist us in replenishing those native plants as we're restoring grave sites. We use the property for celebrating life cycle and community events, having concerts and other entertainment. We dog parties in Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., and goat yoga in Pennsylvania. Family picnics, even baptisms and weddings are not unusual. We're bringing back processions. This is something that we've lost the sense of. It used to be part of the entire program. And it's helpful because it begins a walking meditation into the cemetery, into the funeral space. We provide plenty of shovels, especially kid-sized ones, for anyone wanting to help fill the grave. And believe me, they do. Little kids get into this. We tend to forget that grief manifests itself physically as well as emotionally. So participation gives us this physical outlet and a way to give of ourselves in a time when generosity matters most. We tend to get caught up in the logistics of natural burial because it's foreign to us. Other people have done it for us all this time. Things like lowering the into the grave, but as you can see, it's a pretty simple thing. On the real benefit of on a human scale is what happens inside each person who shows up for the funeral, and they realize that they've become part of something bigger that'll have a lasting impact on the planet. Here's some other pieces to the funeral reinvention puzzle. Environmental justice is served by welcoming people of all races, religions, and differences into nature where they may not have felt safe before. Economic justice is served when pricing for burial truly reflects costs associated with the cemetery's operating needs, not the whatever the market will bear real estate model that we currently use. Social justice is served when people have real access to options that reflect their values. Sustainable burial can happen on conserved land while other parts of the protected parcels do what they're meant to do. Keep sequestering carbon, purifying water, cleansing air, and supporting wildlife and plant communities. So the question then is, what can you do in practical terms to help change things up? One of the first things is, as we talked about at the beginning, keeping a loved one home just a little bit longer, if not for quite a period of time. It's typical to keep someone home for a day, up to maybe 3 days here in the US, if you're going to do this yourself. In other countries, they go weeks. We just bathe the body. We keep the body cool instead of embalming in a facility, and that's pretty easy to do. There's no hurry. There are no funeral police, and neither does anyone stop you at the border of another state to look for a dead body in your trunk. This is all stuff that we can do ourselves. The second thing you can do, as we mentioned before, is buy or make caskets and shrouds locally. That's pretty easy to do. You can make them yourself, even. A third piece is to buy or make, to form or join a care group in your community. This can make a huge difference. You can support your local land trust, one that might be partnering with a burial ground. Land trusts don't run cemeteries, but they can partner with cemetery groups. You could get involved with a local green burial group. And you could nudge your cemetery trustees to relax those vault requirements in your local cemetery, or maybe run for office yourself. Joe Seehey, who started the Green Burial Council, once said to me, "No one goes to a restaurant and orders something that's not on the menu." It's important to know that funeral directors in New Hampshire are legally prohibited from owning or operating cemeteries. So we need to help get green burial on their menu so that they can help families access green burial. I wanted to show you this. This is the NewHampshireFuneral.org website. We've been providing information to people about how to do home funerals, how to find a green burial space. You'll find that under green burial. You'll find a list of green burial cemeteries in the US and Canada. This is the master list that's kept for all the various organizations and for the public. You'll find all kinds of other resources here, including books about green burial, articles, videos, all kinds of things under resources. So take a look at this, spend a little time on this website. The next thing I want to let you know about is this new organization we are just starting, or is just forming, called Natural Burial New Hampshire. And we are essentially an overarching organization that is going to be fundraising, providing support, both financially and with education and so on, and help cemetery operators as different regional groups in the state form in order to start those independent natural cemeteries. So this is an important place to start as well. Take a look at that. We have a group in the Seacoast region that is already formed and starting up, starting to be educating in the area and looking for land. We have a group here in central New Hampshire and the Plymouth Holderness area, and we have a group in the Upper Valley coming together fairly soon here with a project that's going to be just over the line into Vermont, but still an Upper Valley resource. So we're looking for more people to help start these efforts so that we can make natural burial available to everyone. So we've talked about a lot of different things here. We talked about funeral poverty and supporting families and communities when a member dies. We've talked about the need to replace these toxic practices and replace them with organic body care. How we can reduce our own carbon footprint in death, and also the myriad benefits of natural burials. So the question for you is, what resonates? For the way I see it, I think that each of us, by making a different decision about all or even some of these pieces and parts that I've mentioned, can make a contribution to climate resiliency. And how we envision our own send-offs will likely mirror our behaviors throughout our lifetimes, and that's a good thing. It'll also determine how we model them for our children and our grandchildren. So I hope that you learned a lot through this, and I hope that you will take a look at some of these resources and decide for yourself what makes the most sense. Thanks for being here.